All right, well, why don't we go ahead and get started. Hi, my name is Andrew DeCandis. I'm the Air Quality Program Manager here at HGAC, and I appreciate and I thank you all for joining us today for Houston-Galveston Area Council's first Climate Pollution Reduction Grant public meeting. More commonly, this project is known as CPRG. As I mentioned before, I manage our air quality programs here at HGAC and within our region's metropolitan planning organization. And as you'll know from our invitations, we're offering the option to participate in person at the HGAC offices and online via Zoom. And we are excited about this work, and we appreciate your help in helping us work through this. So all online attendees will be muted. If you have any questions, either in the room or online, please raise your hand to be recognized. And this meeting is being recorded and will be posted to HGAC's CPRG website within the next week. And this website is h-gac.com/climate-pollution-reduction-grant-program. Next slide, please. I'd also like to note that we have American Sign Language interpreter and Spanish interpreters available for translation. To access the ASL interpreters, please reference the access instructions on the slide. And at this time, I'd like to invite our Spanish translator, Wendy Almazan, to speak up and give instructions on how to use that part of the service.
Hola, buenos días. Mi nombre es Wendy.
Actually, Andrew, I'm sorry, Randy. Rosemary Angola has shown up the interpreter for the Zoom.
Oh, okay, great.
So, Rosemary, if you can introduce yourself.
Rosemary Angulo, intérprete para el español. Métase al chat y levante la mano cuando me necesite.
All right, thank you very much. So next slide, please. Forward, Greg. Thank you. So this meeting is scheduled for 2 hours, in which we plan to provide an overview of the CPRG program, discuss climate planning in Texas and within our region, discuss our regional greenhouse gas inventory, and look at the ways that you can engage with this process. And we also plan to review the project timeline and next steps as we end the program. So we will be allowing time for questions after each agenda item. Questions and comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and we're going to try to be very strict on that to allow us to move smoothly through the agenda. And we also plan to reserve the last 30 minutes at the end of the agenda for an open question period. Next slide, please. And now I'd like to invite Metropolitan Planning Organization Director Craig Rayborn to talk about HGAC and this exciting new program. Director Rayborn.
Hi, everybody. So I just want to thank everyone in the room and online for coming today. This is a really important program for HGAC, and this opportunity is something that comes along very, very rarely. It's something personally, I've been waiting probably 20 professional years for an opportunity like this, and so it's very exciting to see this come to fruition. So climate planning at HGAC, we've been working going back roughly 10 years or so, specifically looking at some of the environmental impacts and ways to mitigate the impacts of climate change. But what's really unique and interesting about this program, this grant opportunity and planning and plans that we'll develop, and then the follow-up grant opportunity, and hopefully all the other things that it leads to, is that it's actually addressing the mitigation side, not the adaptation side, and trying to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and finding ways to do that. The other thing that we really like about this is it really is intended to be a regional approach. So for those who've been working on climate policy, there's been national, there's been state, and then there's been local, but there really hasn't been a lot going on at the regional level. And so that's one of the really nice things about this particular program is it's intended to try to find ways to pull together all the different communities in large metropolitan regions, and frankly some of the smaller metropolitan regions around the country, to be able to find ways to develop the strategies and the plans to mitigate the greenhouse gas emissions from their regions, and that's really exciting too. And then the third thing that I think is really interesting and valuable about this program is how, we're talking today about the overall program, and it's important to note it's two phases. There's the plan development phase, but then they backed it up when they passed the law that provided this funding. They backed that planning up with a commitment to actually provide dollars to implement. I think it's a total of $4.7 billion nationally. But what that means is the things that we identify in the plans, we're going to be able to compete for funding in the region, and that's really valuable too. And hopefully we'll be able to bring those opportunities in so that the strategies and the plans and the efforts that we identify here will be able to provide not just the climate benefits, but also economic development and workforce development benefits throughout the region as well. And so again, I just want to thank everyone for participating. It's a really great turnout, both online and in the room, and so that's very exciting to see. With that, I'll just turn it back over to the program. So, Far, up.
Thank you. So good morning, and thanks everyone for attending this meeting. Like Director Rayborn said, this is a very important project and a very new project for HGAC. I'm Far Andrews. I am the Air Quality Principal Planner in the Transportation Department here at HGAC. And this morning, I'm going to give you an overview of the CPRG program. Can we go to the next slide, please? So this program was really created in 2022 by the Inflation Reduction Act, which provided a $5 billion initial investment for states and local entities to develop and implement greenhouse gas reduction strategies. And then in March of last year, EPA released the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program opportunity. The primary goal of this program is to tackle damaging climate pollution and at the same time support the creation of jobs, deliver cleaner air, and help to lower energy costs for overburdened families. So EPA is implementing the CPRG program in two phases. The first phase of this program is a planning grant, which provided $250 million in a non-competitive grant for areas to develop climate plans. And the second phase is an implementation grant, which it has earmarked $4.6 billion. It's a competitive process, and it's really to support the policies and programs that are included in the Phase 1 plan for this program. Next slide, please. So HGAC was awarded the Phase 1 grant, and we're administering a $1 million CPRG grant to develop a strong plan with strategies for reducing greenhouse gas emissions and other harmful pollutants. This planning grant funded 60-plus entities across the nation, including 7 agencies across Texas were awarded this same planning grant and are initiating similar programs. The outcome of these programs will be develop plans that really reduce greenhouse gases. In addition to the state here in Texas, other MSAs have this: the Austin area, Dallas-Fort Worth, San Antonio, McAllen, and El Paso. So the state of Texas is pretty much going to be covered with strategies to reduce greenhouse gases. Next slide, please. So the CPRG Phase 1 planning grant that I mentioned has 3 really distinct parts. 3 deliverables: a priority climate action plan, or PCAP, a comprehensive climate action plan, the CCAP, and the status report that we'll have to deliver to EPA over the next 2.5 years. Next slide, please. So the first deliverable is the Priority Climate Action Plan, or PCAP. And this plan is due to EPA on March 1st, 2024. So we're in that last 60-day window to deliver this plan. So I'm glad so many people were able to show up and support and bring ideas for this planning process. The PCAP is supposed to identify near-term actions to prepare for the implementation grant. And we can, in the PCAP, we can focus on a specific sector, or we can focus on all 6 of the emission sectors. And the PCAP also allows for building on existing planning efforts, which we'll hear about some of those later in this process. And it has really limited requirements for the PCAP, where we're going to be just really setting a foundation to build a strong, robust CCAP. Next slide, please. So the second deliverable is the Comprehensive Action Plan, and this is due 2 years from the date that we were awarded. So, and this plan is supposed to be more fully fleshed out and more robust. It needs to cover all the greenhouse gas reduction measures in all of the 6 significant sectors for emission sources, and establish near and long-term goals for greenhouse gas emission reductions. And there's the added additional requirement of doing extra analysis to really support this implementation and build the science foundation for moving in this direction. Next slide, please. So the third and final deliverable is a status report. And this is due at the close of the grant, but this is different from a closeout report. This status report is really a component of a continual improvement process that'll need to be implemented with this program, where we go back and we look at the strategies and the measures that we've included in this planning process and make sure they're meeting their projections. Make sure that we're on target. And in this final status report, we'll also have the opportunity to update the plan if we realize that one of the strategies isn't performing as expected. And then we'll just be able to incorporate and identify other implementation opportunities. So I think this is a crucial piece, and really not to be confused with just the final report that will be submitted for the grant. Next slide, please. So as Director Rayborn mentioned, EPA also announced a phase 2 already. The NOFA came out last year. And the second phase of the CPRG is an implementation grant. It's really designed to provide funding to implement projects that we've included in our PCAP. The EPA anticipates making about 30 to 115 awards nationwide. So there'll be a lot of funding out there to implement and get these plans in motion and start the greenhouse gas reductions sooner versus later. Applications for phase 2 are due April 1st, 2024. So we have a month between turning in our PCAP and submitting an application for implementation. Eligible applicants include recipients of the planning grant, states, municipalities, and tribes. So phase 2 is also going to be a very competitive process because, again, there may only be 115 awards. So EPA is really incentivizing a collaborative application And scoring is going to be based on cumulative benefits of initiatives that are included in your PCAP. EPA has also set some parameters about the implementation program, so they won't be awarding multiple grants for the same initiative in the same area. So they're going to, keep a real watchful eye on double dipping. And EPA also doesn't anticipate making 2 awards to the same level of government in the same area. So this is an exciting opportunity, not only to come up with a plan, but make sure that that plan actually gets implemented. Next slide, please. So there's so many benefits and co-benefits incorporated into the CPRG program. I did list a couple of them on the slides, and maybe I'll highlight a few of those. I think one of the biggest co-benefits to this program is that there are multi-pollutant reduction opportunities. So our region is currently non-attainment for the ozone standard, and strategies that go into our PCAP plan will have the added benefit of reducing ozone and possibly reducing PM, and we'll be quantifying that information too and providing it to EPA. And then another benefit that we've already mentioned a couple times is the access to the federal implementation funding to get your plans moving forward. And the program also requires us to recognize and incorporate our Justice 40 areas, low-income communities, communities that aren't typically a part of this conversation, need to be a part of this planning process. So more voices just helps us build a stronger plan. So this program will also build strong regional collaborations, give us the opportunity to explore more topics, maybe get ahead of some pending legislation, and just really understand what our regional needs are in this area. Next slide, please. So our next presenter is from TCEQ. I mentioned earlier that this program is really helping us build strong regional collaborations. I'll let you introduce her. Thank you.
Sure. So our next presenter is Casey Savinich from TCEQ. She's their CPRG expert on staff. And I'll introduce Casey. Casey, are you here?
I am here. So I just go ahead and get started. So I am the project manager for CPRG, as you said, the expert. And so I'll talk to you guys a little bit about our planning efforts at the state level. Next slide. So I'm just going to quickly go over, what our emissions are in Texas, because that may look a little different than what our emissions are for Houston specifically. And then I'll go over some of the preliminary measures we're looking at for reducing these emissions. And then I'll go over some next steps, challenges, and also ways that you can get involved. Next slide. So just to start, this is just a very high-level overview of the greenhouse gas emissions in Texas. I'm sure I don't need to say that Texas has a lot of emissions, especially greenhouse gas emissions. But here we've broken it down by economic sector, and that's going to help us at the state identify where we need to target our priorities. And so this pie shows one of the largest sectors in Texas is industry, electric power, and transportation. Those 3 sectors are almost 90% of our greenhouse gas emissions in Texas. But also, when you dive down into the details of what composes of all these emissions in these different sectors, the majority of those emissions are coming from fossil fuel combustion. So transportation and electric power, almost the entire majority of those sectors are fossil fuel combustion. So that's where we want to focus our measures. Next slide. And so, so our priority measures for Texas are going to focus on incentivized voluntary measures that reduce criteria pollutants, as Far mentioned, ozone, particulate matter, SO2, those types of pollutants, hazardous air pollutants, in addition to greenhouse gases. So we want to get as many co-benefits as possible from our reduction measures. Some of the draft measures I have listed out here that we're discussing at the state level are hitting up the three big players, right? Industry, electric power, and transportation. I do want to say this is a draft list. It's not complete or detailed, but we will be having those forthcoming at the end of this month. So, as far as industry, we're looking at things like electrification, alternative fuel, and switching infrastructure to be able to accept alternative fuels. We're looking at ways to promote energy efficiency in industry, or decarbonize certain hard to decarbonize industries such as cement. We're looking at options to replace refrigerants that have hydrofluorocarbons. And we're also looking at ways to reduce methane from oil and gas. As far as electric power goes, we are looking at things possibly to upgrade transmission to help get more renewable generation to folks. We're looking at other things such as nuclear, geothermal, different types of generation that are clean. We're also looking at extra renewable energy storage so that we can make sure that energy that is produced from renewables is reliable for the state. And we're also looking at ways to lower demand or promote carbon capture for power plants that maybe are still utilizing fossil fuels. And then as far as transportation sector goes, the state is looking at things such as decarbonizing ports, airports and rail, and all the variety of measures that would go along with that. We're also looking at infrastructure for alternative fuels. So that includes hydrogen, but also electric vehicle charging. And we're also looking at ways to promote zero emission vehicles. And that's not just at the light duty vehicle, so that's the cars people drive, but also at the medium and heavy duty level. Next slide. And so finally, how can you get involved with the state planning efforts? These links here will take you to first the TCQ CPRG webpage where you can get information on the state's planning activities. We have a Microsoft form on the website. You can use the link here. You can submit your project ideas. And we also have a list, an email list you can sign up for where we'll send updates on what we're doing. And so the next steps for the state is we've got to detail all these measures I listed. We've got to, as Far said, quantify what reductions we're going to get and determine who has regulatory authority, engage with the community, and then submit all our documents. And so that's all I have for you guys. You can go to the next slide. It has my contact information if there's questions. And I mean, I think I have a few minutes to answer questions.
Yes, you do.
Great.
You have a question on the Zoom. So Harrison Humphreys, I'm asking you to unmute on Zoom.
Hey, Casey, thanks for the presentation. Could we go back to the draft strategy slides?
I think it's the next one.
Yeah, you may have to help me. I'm sorry.
It's
more.
one slide after this. Yeah.
Got it.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah, just looking at the transportation one, the thing that immediately strikes me as a concern is a lack of any mention of reducing vehicle miles traveled or multimodal efforts. And that's particularly striking because most cities within Texas, their climate action plans call for a reduction in VMT and multimodal alternatives to driving. And, Houston particularly, I think arguably has more vehicle miles traveled and issues with cars on the road than nearly any other city in the state, if not the country. So I think that's a big missing piece of that. And I was wondering why that's not included.
Yeah, so I think we're looking at it as more of something that is better implemented at the municipal level and in the cities. We want to provide them the options for figuring out ways to reduce VMT. It's just something that's a little more difficult at the state level. Um, but I do appreciate that suggestion. I do think it's something worth looking at.
That, to be honest, that answer is quite surprising because, TxDOT is a primary planner, even at the local level, but certainly at the regional and state level. And their policies dictate quite a bit of transportation infrastructure. So that I got to say, I disagree with that. And that's really concerning to hear.
Okay, well, I do appreciate that comment and I will make sure to look into it further. But I can't promise that it will be something we look at the state level. I will say we are working with TxDOT and looking at getting them to provide ideas as well, just to let you know that.
Okay, we have another question here in the room.
Yeah, my name is Gary Scoggin. I represent the city of Texas City on RACPAC. When I looked at the inventory that you had, the power, transportation, and industrial sources for the state accounted for, roughly 90%. I guess my first question is that probably representative of also the Houston-Galveston area that we're talking about here. I would guess it's pretty close. And if so, then if you look at these three sectors, there's a lot of externalities. It gets a little bit back to Harrison's question in that, vehicle electrification, there's national policies and things that we may or may, we don't have any real control of, but we'll have to live with. In the industry, there's a lot of folks that are going to, net zero goals to make reductions. And I'm just wondering how those external, some regulatory, some voluntary, would play into this regional plan.
Yeah, and I'm not sure. I believe that there will be a presentation on the emissions from Houston, so it will be interesting to see how those compare to what the state is what the state is at. And can you? I'm sorry. What was the second part of your question?
Yeah, it's just a lot of external initiatives are going on, some voluntary, some be mandated, whether it's vehicle electrification, it's net zero policies among a bunch of industries, the hydrogen hub in Houston, all of that. And maybe this is a better question for later, but I just wondered how those kind of externally driven reduction measures apply well to the state plan and to the local plan.
I got you. Thank you. Sorry. Yes, there are, there is a wide variety of other measures available under the Inflation Reduction Act. And EPA has told us that we are able to stack variety of measures. We are able to include those in our plan. And just keep in mind, just because a measure is in the priority plan, it doesn't mean it's something that we are applying for funding. It may be something that is already funded that's part of our plan. So we definitely are looking at all these other things that are occurring already in the state.
We have one more question.
Okay. Yeah, we have one more question here in the room.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Stefania Tomaskovic, and I'm with the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience. And I have a quick question. I actually have a few questions. So you mentioned Justice 40 and the focus on low-income communities. And I'd really like to hear a little bit more about how you're thinking about engaging.
We are not able to hear on Zoom.
I'm sorry.
Is that better?
Greg, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, try one more time.
I think it may be the roving microphone, maybe.
Okay, let's try a second.
Okay.
Sorry about that.
Thanks. Can you hear me now?
Yes, much better.
Great. So My name is Stefania Tomaskovic, and I'm with the Coalition for Environment, Equity, and Resilience. And I wanted to ask about how TCEQ is envisioning incorporating Justice 40 into this planning process, and also in terms of community engagement, how do you see that happening, and are there any dates or times, or what are the plans for that right now?
That is a great question. And it has been a challenge just with these timelines to get the engagement going in a meaningful way, but we do look to start holding public meetings, likely either towards the end of January or beginning of February, so we can get input from the public. Justice 40 is definitely something we're looking at. And we do plan on doing a benefits analysis. It is required part of the plan. But we think a lot of the elements that we'll include in our plan will benefit low income and disadvantaged communities, especially maybe not directly, but indirectly with cleaner air, especially in some of these areas that have a lot of industrial activity.
I think we should move to the next agenda item.
All right, I think that's all of our questions for the moment. I think we can go and transition on to some of our local partners here in our region. Our next presentation will be from Priya Zachariah and Tomas Pommier from the Department of Sustainability at the City of Houston.
Good morning. Can you hear us okay?
We can.
Yes. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning to the HGAC folks, Andrew Farr and the team, and good morning to everyone on the call and in the audience. I'm Priya Zachariah. I'm the Chief Resilience and Sustainability Officer for the city. And with me is Tomas Pommier, who's also part of the Resilience and Sustainability Office as the Deputy Assistant Director. I want to offer a few just high-level comments on the work we do, and I'm going to pass it off to Tomas to talk about specifically the mitigation work, the inception of the Climate Action Plan, and the work that's ongoing currently. First of all, I want to say that we are really grateful to be part of this collaborative effort. A lot of our work has been local, and some of it has been regional, but also national. But I think there's a great opportunity to really push forward the regional part of our collaborative efforts, and to especially make the best of the opportunities that the IRA and the IIJA are providing. So our office at the City of Houston is responsible for the implementation of not one, but two plans. So we have a Resilient Houston plan, and we have a Climate Action Plan. And in our office, which is a combined office, a rather unique configuration across the country, we are responsible for both adaptation and mitigation implementation measures. And what we have realized in the 2 years since this office has been put together in this combined format, which is October 2021, is that there's a lot of efficiencies, not just in leveraging municipal and community and private sector resources, but also it helps us be a little more focused and sharper in our response when it comes to public messaging and public education around both adaptation and mitigation, because the two are not siloed really and need to be thought about together. But today's discussion is primarily about mitigation and the Climate Action Plan. Can we go to the next slide, please? But before we get to that, the way that we have framed the resilience part of the discussion is as a continuation of response to a disaster, recovery from that response to a disaster, and then the third step of it, if we have to break that cycle of response and recovery, is really to invest in pre-recovery or preparation, and that is building resilience. The way that we have framed resilience is very much from multi-programmatic as well as at multiple scales. And we have seen that in the implementation as well. We have tried our best to keep multiple programs in the implementation phase at the same time. When you look at the different scales at which the implementation should make sense, the work at the planning as well as the implementation phase is organized as thinking about the individual Houstonian or the individual household, thinking about the neighborhoods that the households are part of, thinking about the larger systems, such as our bayous, such as the transportation and our transit infrastructure, our roadway network, and our bike and our walking networks, thinking about it holistically at the level of a city geography and finally as a region. And that has helped us put a lot of actions into the implementation phase. And we have not prioritized one scale over another. But what has really come to the fore in the last few years is the element of community resilience that really ties all of these different scales together. Even when you think about making resilient investments in resilient infrastructure, at the end of the day, you're really looking at benefits at the household and the neighborhood level. So community resilience has really stood out to us as a primary point of focus. And with that, I'm going to hand it off to Tamar to talk about the work around mitigation and the climate action plan.
Hi, everybody. I'm going to try to be fairly brief. We've launched our climate action plan in April of 2020, so we're a little over 3 years into implementation. So you can imagine that we'd have a lot to talk about if we were listing every project and program we've been working on to mitigate emissions in Houston in the past 3 years. So with that, I invite you for further detail on those activities to take a look at our 3-year report that we published on greenhoustontx.gov. You'll have the address at the end of the presentation. If we can go to the next slide, please. This is just taken from our resilience and climate action plan. It's a visual representation of the causes of climate change, the impacts we're seeing in the city of Houston in particular, and examples of the types of mitigation and adaptation activities that we are taking part of to mitigate climate change and adapt to climate change. Next slide, please. And here you have a breakdown of emission sources for our geography, in particular the city of Houston. You see that it isn't necessarily very different from what TCEQ just presented. I'm not going to go into too much details, or I'll repeat a lot of what Casey already said. But you see that for the city of Houston, the main sectors emitting carbon emissions are transportation and energy. And then you see that in the breakdown on road transportation emissions, passenger cars are really the biggest chunk of it. So our activities focus on electrification is one thing, in a lot of the focus is on passenger cars. But of course, as some of the commenters expressed, a big chunk of the work is also looking at changing our transportation patterns, looking at increasing transit and active modes of transportation. And then on the energy sector, and we'll see in the next slide how we break that down in the climate action plan. But these are this is the energy that we consume to a great extent for our buildings, as well as industrial operations. So if we can go to the next slide. Here are the 4 strategic areas of the Houston Climate Action Plan, and they are based on those sectors of emissions. Transportation is the first pillar of our Climate Action Plan, and as I was saying, a lot of the actions focus on reducing miles traveled, that's in changing modes of transportation, so that looking at transit, looking at active modes of transportation, but also patterns of development, and then electrification of transportation. The second bucket is energy transition. That's another one where we think we'll see a lot of similarities and synergies in the region. we like to call Houston the energy capital of the world, and a big part and maybe the differentiator in the climate action plan for Houston versus other cities around the country and around the world is the ambition to make the city a hub for energy transition and become the energy transition capital of the world. So here we're looking at investment in renewable energy, in other low carbon technologies, and I think some of the commenters also mentioned hydrogen and carbon capture. This is also where we have included in our climate action plan actions that are to be undertaken, not necessarily directly by the city and the government side, but through public-private partnerships with industry, with communities, and so on and so forth. Third bucket is building optimization. As I was saying earlier, the biggest chunk of emissions from the energy side is the energy we consume to power our buildings. So some of that is internally focused at optimizing and building efficiencies for the municipal portfolio of buildings. But of course, again, with public-private partnership, we are looking at improving energy efficiency throughout the city in private building, whether commercial or residential. And then on the materials management side, you saw that the chunk of the emissions is smaller there, but there are multiple co-benefits to the actions on waste. And so here we're looking at reducing the amount of waste that goes to landfill, actions on recycling as well as composting. And then, of course, you see the equity bar at the bottom of this graphic. We look at equity through all of our actions, whether it be in the climate action plan or the Resilient Houston strategy. And this is looking at focusing our impact on the areas or the communities that suffer the most from the different impacts of climate change or emissions in our city. And with that, I will leave it open for questions. If we can go to the next slide, there is a little bit of information on where you can find us and where you can find information on our office and our activities.
Okay, well, if there are no questions, I'm sorry, we do have a question.
Hello, can you guys hear me on Zoom? Cool.
Sir.
Well, my name I am the policy coordinator at SEER, and I was wondering if you can answer which neighborhoods are you going to be focusing on with that climate action plan?
The question is not very clear. Could you repeat the question?
Yes.
I can relay it if you want. The question was, what neighborhoods do you anticipate focusing on with the climate action plan?
I can take that. So thank you for the question. I think it really depends on the action in the climate action plan. For instance, we recently applied for a charging and fueling infrastructure grant from USDOT. The grant very explicitly stated that the infrastructure should be placed or would be the applications that would place the infrastructure, recommended placing this infrastructure in disadvantaged communities would be more competitive. And since that aligns really well with the work that we are doing, that's how the application was written. We did the analysis on the DAC communities, and the application was shaped around that. So it is not really one community over another. We look at a lot of factors and criteria to assess need. But very central to all of our thinking is that the lens of equity runs through all of the actions that we are taking. When we are trying to prioritize the 297 actions for implementation in the Resilient Houston and the Climate Action Plan, something that runs through as a horizontal criteria is if the action can be equitably deployed in an area of need or vulnerability or an underserved community. So it's taking all of those into consideration and trying to bring the investments where they are most needed in under-resourced communities.
Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Are there any other questions, either online or in the room? Okay, well then we will go ahead and move on to our next speaker. And also on Zoom, we have Jesse Dickerman, the Chief of Staff at the Office of County Administration at Harris County, and one of our partners on this project with Harris County, or with City of Houston, I'm sorry.
Hi, can you hear me? Can everybody hear me okay?
We can.
Great. Thanks so much. Apologies on the front end. Don't have slides for the group today. But we'll walk you guys through what our climate planning efforts have looked like and what we're looking to do going forward. When we are somewhat behind the City of Houston. We delivered our climate action plan last January. We're about to release our first annual report. Look for that near the end of January with all the actions around that. And again, that is our internal climate action plan. We've split the planning process into an internal and external climate action planning. The internal, very similar to what Tomas and Priya described. Most of our direct scope 1 emissions are coming from buildings and fleet. So we've got a number of actions on energy efficiency of buildings, investing in renewable energy around our assets, and electrifying our own fleet, as well as sustainable procurement, waste management. That's on the internal side, trying to find ways for our own employees to reduce their direct carbon emissions through multimodal transportation as opposed to everybody driving to work. Again, stuff that you'd see, I think, across cities and urban counties across the nation. On our external effort, I want to start off and thank Stefani, as I saw is in the audience, and Sear, who's been a key partner for us in really what we're calling our climate justice planning effort. That effort started last year. We held 5 meetings, 1 online and 4 in person across Harris County, in partnership with Sear, funded through generous private donations. We engaged about 200 community members across the county, really to develop a shared vision for what climate justice is going to mean for the citizens of the county. I think for us, it really starts with, we've got to co-produce what our actions are, what can we do, what the community wants to see. And that really starts with a vision, right? And a vision about that centers equity, that puts trust forward, models transportation and accountability, and proactively prepares the region for climate change in whatever way that we can.
All right, it looks like we have.
We may have frozen.
Yeah.
The Commissioner's Court is sorry. Am I back?
I'm sorry, you froze for just a minute. Yeah.
Okay. I think as folks have probably heard from anyone who's watched Commissioner's Court, making sure that we are evaluating equity within flood control has been a key effort the last 6 years for Commissioner's Court. That effort continues. It is not overlapping with our climate justice work today, but is clearly, they are a key partner. So that climate justice planning effort, SEER helped us deliver an initial report in the last couple of months, and as we move forward over the course of the year, we're looking to develop our PCAP in partnership with the community, likely put together some sort of climate advisory board, and and again, especially with the federal dollars and federal opportunities available, where are the places that there's an overlap between what we're eligible for, what power we have as a local government, and what the community wants to see in climate justice planning. So just brief remarks. Thanks. We'll take any questions. And again, and I'll also say, again, we're far behind the city of Houston and have appreciated their work and are, trying to model what we're doing on some of the expansive work that they've already led on. Thanks very much.
All right, thank you very much, Jesse. Are there any questions in the room or online? Okay, thank you very much. We'll go ahead now and transition on to a presentation from Meredith Jennings. She's a senior research associate at
Can't hear you, Andrew.
Research Center.
Oh.
Wow. Well, there's always one person who forgets to turn the mic on. So next on our agenda, we have a presentation from Meredith Jennings, a senior research associate at the Houston Advanced Research Center. HARC is a primary partner in the CPRG program and the technical lead for this project. Welcome, Meredith.
Hi, thank you, Andrew. Good almost afternoon, well, we're still morning. You can go to the next, before I start, so thank you for giving us the opportunity to get a little bit into the details of the technical process that will be part of this CPRG program. I'll be giving the presentation, but I'm co-leading this effort at HARC with my colleague, Dr. Ibrahim Islami. And so feel free to throw him some really technical questions that you want answered. Next slide. So we work at HARC. HARC stands for the Houston Advanced Research Center. We are a research nonprofit located in the Woodlands. We have a long history of working with the City of Houston on its sustainability efforts. Our mission is really dedicated to sustainability, and we have a renewed focus now on the social aspects of sustainability, looking to help people thrive and nature flourish, and focusing on helping those benefits also extend to those disadvantaged communities that have historically not had the same level of investment in this area. On the slide, you'll see our office. It's actually the first net zero office building in Texas. We're very proud of that. And our site has been developed without any irrigation. Everything is nature-based solutions. And so if you're very interested in seeing this work in action, implementation, please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to have you visit and see all the technologies that we are demonstrating as a living lab for you all. Next slide. So I know this is a common slide to show for a climate presentation, but just wanted to reiterate that climate change is costing us money. So this is a chart that the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration updates every year. I think a newest one actually came out to cap off the end of the 2023, but over $600 billion in damages to weather and climate-related disasters were realized in 2023. And so this timeline over the last 40 years or so is just showing the impact that climate change and those greenhouse gas emissions are having on our economy. Next slide. And so the reason why I want to show this slide is to discuss really the different scenarios that we are looking at if we do not control our emissions. And so at the high end, this is if we go unchecked. We can see there are other scenarios where we are able to introduce some emissions reduction measures that will decrease our emissions over time. And so without these deep reductions, we are expecting climate scientists around the world agree that every degree of warming is going to damage irreversibly our environment and our economies. And so go to the next slide. If we take another look at what those scenarios mean in terms of the climate impacts, on the left side, you'll see those same scenarios compared to the expected warming and temperature. And so what we decide to do now, how we implement those measures today, has a major impact on global temperature rise. So we must take this opportunity and investment seriously to be able to reduce the climate impacts that we're expecting to see as climate scientists. So on the right side, you can see there's a QR code. HARC, we have developed a tool called RESIN. It's the regional, actually I'm not going to pretend to remember what the acronym is. So it's an interactive tool where you can actually explore at the regional level some of the climate impacts that we're expecting, and these are derived from downscaled climate projections. So this screenshot, it's not the total 13-county region of HGAC, but it's a good start, shows what the impact of temperature will look like in the 2080s under that high emission scenario. And so check out the RESIN tool. It's very interactive, like I said, and you can see what the impact of different scenarios of emissions, looking at temperature and precipitation impacts. Next slide. Thanks to the Casey from TCQ, you saw a little bit of what the profile of Texas's emissions look like, but I want to underscore that Texas leads the way in emissions. So you saw what the composition of the emissions sources are, but this is a very deep blue color here on the map of comparing emissions from across the country at the state level. So 873 million metric tons of CO2 equivalents in 2021. And so that's equivalent to almost 200 million gasoline-powered passenger cars, 170 million homes electricity for 1 year, and emissions from 234 coal-fired power plants. So it makes a huge difference to see what Texas can do on really the country's emissions portfolios. Next slide. So this is a little bit of a preview on what really the impact of, this is at the county level, of Harris County compared to similar large counties in Texas. We at HARC are responsible for doing the greenhouse gas inventory for this program, but we are still in the process of doing the quality assurance plan for the project. So we have not yet completed the inventory. That'll hopefully come in later presentations as we're able to do that analysis. But this comes from the National Emissions Inventory that was published in 2017. On the left, you can see the CO2 emissions comparing industry to transportation sources in the blue and orange respectively. And compared to other large counties in Texas, Harris County has by far the most emissions, and largely coming from the industrial sector. Similarly, on the right-hand side, that's looking at the methane emissions, which is another greenhouse gas. Next slide. So talked a lot about just sort of the setting the stage. So what can we do? You heard a lot of these examples already from Harris County and the city of Houston. Don't need to go too much into detail as to the differences between what we're talking about with mitigation and adaptation, but I do want to re-emphasize that some of these key sectors that we're looking at in the Priority Climate Action Plan do deliver benefits with both of these areas. So green infrastructure, energy and fuel efficiency, and transportation infrastructure improvements all help both of these buckets of mitigation and adaptation. Next slide. So what you can expect the greenhouse gas analysis and the technical piece from this process to look like. So for the 13 county region, we'll be developing county level greenhouse gas inventory. And we plan to use a software that other regions are using called ClearPath. That is managed by ICLEI, which is a nonprofit that works as a sustainability kind of advisory firm. And so we'll be looking at all of the sources at the high level sectors. This PCAP is sort of designed to be a quick and dirty analysis. So because of this expedited timeline, they wanted the PCAP to help inform those implementation grants. So we'll be able to get into more details through that CCAP process that FAR talked about. But the goal of the PCAP is to give everyone a good idea of what is the basic inventory at the county level. The next phase is going to be once we know a little bit of what the proposed actions that are going to come from you all and your feedback and the basic, trends that we see from the city and the county, what they're planning to do, we're going to help quantify the potential emissions reductions of those actions so that way we can understand what that'll do to the baseline. The third piece here is looking at the future scenario. So what does it look like for a business as usual case scenario where we don't do anything differently? And that's based on the expected, growth of the region as well. So we're expecting more cars, more homes, et cetera, to grow our inventory. And then what is the scenario where we're actually able to implement all of these actions that we hope to do? And then finally, this is sort of a pull and push and pull type of exercise of establishing those targets. It's important for any plan to have a target. How do you know what goal you're trying to achieve? And so it'll be through this stakeholder engagement process, through looking at the modeling to know what is a realistic target, what's an ambitious target. So that's another requirement for the PCAP and the CCAP is to establish these targets. Next slide. Tamal already showed a lot more detail regarding the city of Houston. I just wanted to give you guys an example of what an inventory looks like at a high level. You can go into a lot more detail in terms of the different sectors. This is a comparison of the city of Houston's baseline inventory in blue and their updated inventory from 2020. And so being able to have that baseline inventory gives us a starting position for this PCAP and CCAP. It'll be the year 2021. And then that status report, we'll be able to look again and see after hopefully some of these actions have started to be implemented, continuing to monitor the inventory to see how much progress we're making is an important piece. Next slide. So I know FAR talked a bit about the co-benefits of this of climate action planning, and so we will be doing a co-benefits analysis in more detail for the CCAP. It's not a required element of the PCAP itself, except for doing the low-income benefits analysis that is required, and that's on the next slide. But what we want to be able to demonstrate here is in evaluating and communicating the value of these projects is the number of multiple co-benefits that will be delivered with these climate action planning projects. Next slide. So the low-income / disadvantaged communities uses the acronym of LIDAC. And so this is a screenshot from this is, I think, using EJ screen, but we will also be using other White House or federal tools like the White House's CGES tool to identify different census tracts and communities that meet these criteria of being disadvantaged communities. And so having that identification will then help us be able to communicate and engage with those affected communities, and then be able to specifically look at those proposed actions and quantify how those communities will be benefited or negatively impacted by specific actions that are being proposed. So this is an important and required element of the Priority Climate Action Plan. Next slide. And then finally, this is an example of what, when I talk about the emission reduction scenarios and targets. So this comes from the City of Houston's Climate Action Plan. That top line running from, I guess, the middle of the y-axis over up to the top right, that is what it looks like if our emissions go unchecked. So this is what we would expect our emissions to look like if we didn't do anything. It's going to get bigger because our population is going to grow. And so what the City of Houston did and what HARC helped support in 2020 was this analysis. This was using a C40's tool called Pathways, but it's going to be very similar to the ClearPath tool that we'll be using. Is once we start to estimate the impact of the actions, what is that cumulative impact of greenhouse reduction look like at different years? So that's what you see on the bottom scale is the time. So most of and this sort of reflects to the inventory. The majority of the emissions we need to see are going to come from the energy sector as well as transportation. And then the goal for the City of Houston was to achieve carbon neutral by 2050, and so that's what this is also trying to show is what does it look like to get there? Is it realistic or not? And no one has been able to demonstrate using activities alone how to get to carbon neutral. So there's going to have to be some level of offsets that will be required to achieve net neutral by 2050. And so really looking as the technologies change, we'll get to update this in this process as well to see what for the region this might look like. Next slide. So yeah, so if anyone has any questions, yes, Stefania.
Thank you. I'm really interested in the co-benefit analysis that
Sure.
you mentioned, and one of the co-benefits that you had listed was resilience, and I could see that going in a lot of different ways. So I'm wondering how you might quantify or analyze resilience as part of that.
That's a great question. So the EPA does have a prescriptive list of what types of co-benefits they want to see. A lot of it is going to be qualitative in this PCAP. For the CCAP, they do want us to quantify particularly the benefits related to the air quality improvements, those co-pollutants. So the resilience piece is probably not going to be extremely quantitative, but as we are able to look at what types of projects are being proposed, for example, like if there's a lot of renewable energy and battery storage coming online, what is that expected to do in terms of resilience for minimizing blackouts or grid stability? Those are things that we are probably able to, especially in the context of the low-income benefits analysis, we'll need to articulate. So that's what we mean by resilience is probably more geared toward the energy sector, especially when we have some of those impacts that we saw from Winter Storm Uri and the numerous extreme heat events that we see. So that is something that it'll most likely be a qualitative. Where we can be quantitative, we will, but it will be in the context of how are low-income communities going to benefit from the resilience of that these projects might bring.
Are there any other questions?
All right. Thank you.
Hi again. So in this part of the agenda, I want to talk a little bit more about how the community can get involved and connect with this CPRG program moving forward. So this program is intended to be a big collaborative effort between the state, the local municipalities, the region, the community, businesses, academia, NGOs. And that's why it's so great to see so many different people in the room and online. And I'd like to, again, thank our partners for joining us from Harris County and the City of Houston and HARC. EPA built a requirement into the CPRG that the lead agency, which is HGAC, coordinate with all appropriate agencies and offices within their government and to develop and adopt the deliverables that are due. So we're working across the 13 county area, inviting municipalities and other governmental entities and communities to weigh in on this. So we've developed a number of ways that the community and stakeholders can participate in this process online, on social media platforms, virtually, and in person. And I just want to kind of introduce you to some of those ideas. And then after this presentation, we'll open it up for comments. Next slide, please. So HGAC is seeking input and ideas and proposals to include in our regional climate plans. And we've created a project application for potential implementation ideas to come into us in a strategic way. So we're extending an offer to public agencies, local governments, universities, transit providers, public ports, and other agencies to partner with us or partner with their local jurisdiction on projects and submit them to our call for projects, which is currently open. Originally, it was planned to close on the 19th, but we've extended that date to the 22nd. So we want to give the community as much time as possible to submit those ideas, and then we can get them back and quantify them to assess them for inclusion in our PCAP or our CCAP, or to move forward into an application for phase 2. So we're starting to get lots of ideas and feedback from the community, and there's no guarantee that projects that are submitted through this process will be included in the PCAP, but it is also giving policymakers a lot of information on potential projects that they can keep an eye out for other funding opportunities. Next slide, please. So the community and the public play a really critical role in building our priority climate action plan. And we really need to hear from as many people as possible on how they feel about the strategies that we're considering or that could be included in this plan. So we've created an engaged website for our CPRG program to collect input from across the 13 county region. So this site, what it does is, it's really clever. So it introduces potential reduction strategies by the emissions sector. And then it gives the visitor an opportunity to let us know if that's something they'd like to see in their community. It's something they can support, or it's something that they oppose. And then there's also an open-ended opportunity where if you have another idea for this sector, we'd love to hear that. So you can also type that in there. So please visit this resource. This is giving us a lot of valuable information to help do our analysis of what goes into this planning process. Next slide, please. So also on that Engage website, We're also offering an opportunity for you to let us know which of the 6 sectors is most impacting you. So on the right-hand column, I think it is, we're asking you to select which sector that you feel like HGAC and this CPRG program should concentrate on. I think this is going to be valuable information leading into the analysis process. And what I really like about this function is that it's like a quick poll. So once you submit your suggestion, it displays results from everyone else who's participated in the poll. So you can know what we're hearing from the community in real time. Next slide, please. So we also need help getting the word out about this opportunity. Like I mentioned earlier, we need as much input, crowdsourcing, completing our surveys, completing our polls, sending us ideas, so we can take all that information and feed it into the analysis process or the evaluation process where we look at what strategies are actually going to go into the plan. So the more input we receive, the better the representation in the plan, and I think the more solid the plan is. We want to make sure that through this planning process, we actually build something that works for the community. So HGAC has a massive email list. We've been sending it out. We have the QR code on this slide. We have flyers and social media opportunities. If you guys could just share them with your networks, that would really help us receive more information. Next slide, please. So on this screen, this is just a screenshot of the website. So all of those opportunities that I mentioned earlier, the call for projects, the share your ideas, the let us know which sector you'd like to see us emphasize. It's all under our main website, and you can access them from the right-hand column there. And this is also the best source for getting updates on the project. Like as we move into different phases of the project, we'll be providing that information there as we further along in our greenhouse gas inventory. This is the best place to find that, or we come up with a draft list of strategies. There's also at the bottom of the right-hand corner a place where you can submit your email address so that we'll know that you want updates. So as we update our website, we'll send you notices. So those are some of the existing ways to engage with this program. This is our first public meeting. I imagine there'll be more public meetings. This hybrid environment seems to work and give us a maximum number of people. I think we're well over 40 online and a good number in the room. So we'll also be going out into the community during the second phase of this project so that people won't have to drive into the city. So we want to extend our reach and really make it more convenient for our LIDAC communities and our rural areas to engage with this process. So now I'll turn it over to Andrew to talk to us a little bit about how we're going to conduct our question and answer session. Thank you.
Okay, great. So this is, as I mentioned before, and as Farah mentioned before, we're going to end our session with, with a much longer Q&A session. So, so please feel free to go ahead and ask us any questions you might have about the presentations, about anything that you've heard today. We'll only have about 30 minutes for this section, so I have a couple of requests. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and I will be trying to enforce that. We have, as you've seen, we have microphones in the room, so they'll be rotated for in-person attendees. Zoom participants, please use the raise hand feature to be recognized. And before you comment, please share your name and organization. And any questions that the panel responds to will be posted online. And if we don't get to address your question today, please feel free to email us at cprg@h-gac.com, and we're happy to answer any questions that you might have. Or you can reach out to me personally or FAR, and we're happy to talk about this program. So I'll turn this over if anyone has any questions.
We do have a question on Zoom. Jennifer, if you don't mind unmuting.
Thanks, everyone. I really appreciate all of these presentations and the opportunity to see these details. I also appreciate the coordination that is being put forth by all levels and all entities. I echo one of my earlier commenters about the importance of understanding what the role is for the state, both the TCEQ and TxDOT and the region and the locals. And so I appreciate that focus on coordination. I realized I didn't introduce myself. For the record, Jennifer Hedaya, I'm with Air Alliance Houston. My question is for all levels, for TCEQ, HGAC, county, city. And it's an open question. Maybe it has multiple parts, but let me give a little bit of premise to it. Everyone's presentation has been very clear in terms of the primary sources of heat trapping gases, and most presentations. Oh, I didn't mean to leave HARC out. This folks from HARC can answer this too. Thank you, Meredith. Everyone's presentation, as I said, has been very clear in terms of the core sources of greenhouse gas emissions or heat trapping gas emissions being industry and transportation. And most presentations have also talked about the co-benefits of a carbon reduction plan on air pollution more broadly. We know that what pollutes the air also warms the climate and vice versa in many cases. What I'm curious about is, for all levels, and again, whoever wants to answer this, hopefully everyone will, what potential reduction strategies are being explored around industry that are not about energy efficiency? Because I've tried to keep track of all of the proposals, and pretty much everyone's talked about energy efficiency for industry. I think we all pretty much know that there are some other sources of carbon emissions and other co-pollutant emissions coming from industry, and we need strategies to reduce those emissions. We know that there are severe Clean Air Act violators in our region that are emitting greenhouse gas emissions and other co-pollutants pretty flagrantly, consistently, sometimes within permitted levels, most of the time outside of permitted levels, but with very little consequence. So it continues to happen. We're getting ready for a cold snap. And so here at Air Alliance, we are expecting flaring to begin. And flaring is a very good example of how those fugitive emissions are allowed to continue, and many of those emissions also include heat trapping gases as well. So I would love for everyone, because I think this is a missing component of this conversation, is efforts to hold current polluters accountable to their permits, closing loopholes on fugitive emissions that will benefit not only carbon emissions, but also the co-pollutants that the plans aim to address as well.
So I think our TCEQ representative had to transition to another meeting. I do know that Casey, and on the state level, this is one of the top things that they're starting to look at strategies around, just because strategies that they're thinking about implementing on this level are best and more consistently implemented from the state level. On the local level, we have added some potential strategies to our Engage site that we're hoping that we'll get the community to weigh in on. And in addition to energy efficiency measures, we're also looking at transitioning to electric equipment, upgrading older equipment to cleaner equipment. We're also looking at programs that could incentivize industrial energy use and processes to like low and no carbon fuels and renewables, programs to develop and expand on markets for low embodied carbon materials. There's some opportunity in that space. Also, so I think there are some opportunities in the industrial sector. I know that EPA has also put out an illustrative list where they've started to collect thoughts and strategies and ideas that they'd like municipalities to look at and consider. So we're also going through that list. It's a pretty extensive list. I think the last time I looked at it, it was over 200 strategies, but and I think this is a place where we really need our community to weigh in for what they'd like to see implemented and what we should move forward with. You know, just checking the site now, it looks like we haven't gotten very much input on the industrial sector. I think transportation is the most popular, but I definitely agree there's a lot of room in that space for reductions.
I really appreciate that, and I will absolutely submit my comments on the survey. I would just end in, I know my time is up, but very briefly, to encourage everyone in this work to be brave in the strategies that you propose and not worry so much about how industry is going to react and the claims that they will make that it's costly for them to operate safely or cleanly. Let's be brave and let's be truly transformative in this work. And that's my last comment. I will definitely take the survey. I really appreciate everybody's time today.
Thank you for that comment. I appreciate that.
Okay, no, we have a couple of comments online. We might have had one in the room. No, okay, we'll turn it over to the next person online. Vinny, who is that?
Jesse Dickerman, feel free to unmute, please.
Hi, thanks. Quick question around projects, because as we've looked at this and thinking through like what projects potential projects to submit, you know, one of the things that we've come across is that CPRG is for projects that we can't necessarily fund with other federal programs. And so, you know, I think, you know, to the last commenter does speak to like, how can we be brave and how can we be doing things different? And curious how HGAC thinks about that and thinks about, you know, what we should be trying to build projects around, and where are those spaces that really fall in between, you know, again, roads and, you know, multimodal transportation often supported by other federal funds. Like, if those are the kind of directions that we go, are we going to get dinged for, you know, recommending things that we should be using other federal sources for? So I'll just throw that out there, and, you know, love to hear everyone's thoughts.
So when EPA released the NOFA for the phase 2 implementation funding, they really opened the gate for what could be funded under this program. So not only are they suggesting and considering funding new projects, but they're also considering funding projects that they're looking at opportunities where they can amplify existing projects. So if there's a project that started and there's a way to upscale it to provide more benefit to our region, they're also looking at those opportunities. This is a great opportunity to like mine existing sustainability plans and climate plans that may have longer horizons for funding that our municipalities have already considered and discussed. And this may be a way to accelerate that implementation so that we get emission reductions faster, because they're also looking at those opportunities. And this funding source doesn't have a matching requirement. And you can also use it to support underfunded or not completely funded projects. So I think there's a lot of opportunity for our region specifically to take advantage of some of these I think it's $4.6 billion with a B. So I'm hoping to see a lot of that implementation flow into our region so that we can recognize some of these emission reductions quicker. I think we had a question in the room.
Hello, everybody. My name is Emmanuel Nunez, and I'm here on behalf of the Goodman Corporation. And my question was specific to submitting projects to both the HGAC call for projects as well as the Texas land opportunity. Is that possible to do?
I don't think we can speak to the Texas one since she's had to leave, but I think we can potentially talk about our local one. What specifically is your question?
I might be able to answer that. So the map that FAR showed of the different PCAP or CPRG programs across the country. So in order to apply for this implementation funding, it has to be an action that's included in an eligible PCAP that you're covered by. So we're lucky that we're actually covered by 2 PCAPs, technically, the states and the region. So as long as there's an activity that you want to do that would be in there and you're an eligible applicant, then it's good. So there are some like municipalities that don't have an MSA that received the CPRG. They fall under the state's PCAP. And then there are some unfortunate cities in other states that the state didn't get a PCAP and they're not under an MSA that got one, so they cannot apply.
Right, so specifically, can we submit a project under both the MSA and Texas?
I mean,
for consideration.
Well, so the NOFA that was released and the instructions that we've received from EPA on the implementation funding is they don't anticipate funding the same project in the same geographic space. So they're really looking at whether they're looking at they don't want to have double dipping happen. Just thinking about if there's an incentive that's available from the state and then the local area offers a very similar incentive, then it creates 2 opportunities for those residents, and they're trying to make sure that the funding is spread more evenly across the nation.
Yeah, I mean, that said, our activities are independent, but I would say entwined. So because we can't, so I think you're probably free to go and submit projects to both. However, our CPRG project and the states are consulting to ensure that, as FAR said, that we don't double these projects, to make sure that because we want to be careful to make sure that we do not rule out any projects that we want to make sure that we're working together so that one of us does not cancel out the other. We want to make sure that we get as much funding for the state and for the region as possible. So we're working together to try to make sure that happens.
Alrighty, next we have Cassidy Ellis on Zoom. Feel free to unmute.
Hi, thank you so much, and thank you for the presentations. Can you hear me okay?
Can.
Great. So I'm Cassidy Ellis. I'm with Amoresco. Just to confirm, the intent here is for HGAC to submit a unified application covering initiatives for the region. You are not anticipating individual organizations submitting or entities submitting other phase 2 applications outside of the HGAC's phase 2 application.
I think that slightly remains to be seen for the moment. I think what in the NOFO that EPA released, they made it very clear that they recommend that regions and states develop coalitions to for submittal for these implementation projects. So we anticipate that our region will have a coalition. I don't think we as an agency are ready to commit to that yet, but and just because we as an MPO, if we apply, that does not mean that there can't necessarily be other coalitions that don't overlap. So we are working with partners, we're working with stakeholders to try to understand or to try to come up with a solution, but I don't think we have anything that we can announce just yet.
Okay, understood.
Oh,
Thank you for that. And
sorry.
I'm sorry, I just had a couple follow-ups, if that's okay.
Sure, and I do actually, our MPO director, Craig Rayborn, has his hand up as well. I think he may have a comment on my response.
Sure. Thanks, Andrew. And sorry, everyone. I had to step out of the room, but I wanted to try to monitor the meeting as best I could while I was getting ready for some other stuff this afternoon. Andrew's right in that we haven't fully committed as an agency to try to lead the coalition grant, but we certainly, I think we're leaning that way. And we're just still kind of continuing to sort of do the, for lack of a better way of putting it, sort of the risk assessment for what we would be assuming if we take on that role. But we are certainly interested, and I'd say at the moment we're willing and we're wanting to help put it together, and then I would bet within a few weeks we'll have gotten to a point where we're comfortable saying that we're willing to lead it. I just want to.
Thank you.
I want to note one other thing too. Is I think a lot of the questions about projects have are relating to seeking funding for the grant, and certainly we can appreciate and understand that. But we also just want to note that it's also a way for us to identify projects to include in the PCAP. So there are really two things that are not quite concurrent, but they're so sequential that they're practically concurrent. And that's the PCAP has to be done by March 1st, and then the grant has to be submitted by the end of March. And so there's not a whole lot of time. So we want to identify a universe of projects that could go into the PCAP. And then from that universe of projects would be the ones that are actually part of the grant that we put forward. So you got to go back to and look at what we've been hearing, or what the NOFO says about how they're going to distribute grants of between 2 million and 500 million, and they're going to distribute, I think it was 30 to 115 grants, and so you just play the numbers a little bit, and we want to try to find the sweet spot, so we're asking for a grant that we think will have a high likelihood of being able to be successful in receiving.
Understood. That makes a lot of sense. And maybe my follow-up questions, because some of these decisions are still to be determined. You may not be able to answer these quite yet, but I guess in theory, if HGAC does submit a phase 2 application, would you anticipate it including specific projects, like down to the specific location, or would you assume it would be on a higher level of sort of types of projects that then there would be sort of a secondary process of sub-awarding managed by the coalition or by HGAC? And that may be too specific at this point.
Yeah, I think I can speak for that. We're really not, I don't think we're quite decided on that as of yet. By its nature, the measures that we're including as part of the PCAP are very broad, because as Meredith mentioned earlier, if a measure is not in the PCAP, it cannot be considered for the implementation grant. So we're keeping that very broad. I think it's a little unclear for the implementation grant what that might look like. Again, we're still working through it on our end. So we'll have more to say about that later, I imagine.
Great, thank you so much.
All right, seeing no other questions in the room, we'll go back to a Zoom caller, Harrison Humphreys.
Hey, thanks, y'all. Going back to the question of industrial emissions and really trying to think boldly about what we can do to stem what is a crisis, the climate crisis. Careful reading of the NOFA from the feds shows that within the scope of this program, it does say the applicants can pursue things like industrial emissions caps and limits to amounts of greenhouse gas emissions coming from specific sectors. So it's less of a question and more of a just pointing out that there's been a lot of discussion about specific projects here, and I think that's probably more appropriate for the PCAP. But as we go into the more long-term planning, I think it's really important to really to interrogate the policy side of things. And when I've brought this up in previous HGAC meetings, I think sort of the feeling is that may be beyond HGAC's specific purview or scope or authority, but since we have both the county and the city in the room and we're all discussing, how do we move forward as a collective, I think that's really important to think about. And I wonder, I guess this could be a question, has that, specifically industrial emissions limits or caps or anything to that end, has that been discussed among the three primary entities here or the state? I think the TCEQ representative left, but I'd love to hear about that.
So a part of this process, developing the PCAP, is that we're being required to look at what authority we have to implement the measures. So all the measures that we're considering, I know EPA listed quite a few that could be included and would reduce greenhouse gases, but they weren't really area specific. So we have to run those through the rubric and see, is this something that Texas would allow? Is this something that we have authority to implement? I know that the TCEQ representative, Casey, mentioned that she's going to really be focusing on voluntary measures instead of mandates or regulatory measures. And I think a lot of that has to do with what authority we have to implement new rules in our area. And what's better implemented on the local level versus the state level versus the national level. So there are definitely a lot of conversations happening about who has the authority to put what in their PCAP. And we want to make sure that what we do put in our PCAP, we can actually implement and make happen in our area.
Hey, I hear that. And Jesse, I think you have an answer for this too. But before I get to that, I just want to address that authority piece. I do hear that and understanding that HGAC does have limits to its power. But this is an unprecedented situation that this is a crisis and we don't really have the tools available at this moment to properly address it. So I do think we have to think beyond the limits of what already exists and what's within our current scope. I think we have to get creative, and I do think that this specific program and the language that they used in the documentation, specifically the NOFA, is encouraging people in dire straits, such as our region, to really push the bounds of what is considered, comprehensive climate action. And I think relying on the specific phraseology, what did y'all, voluntary measures, I think that's just not going to get us anywhere near. So I really encourage us to be bold and think more on the policy side of things instead of specifically just sticking with projects. Sorry to cut you off, Jesse.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I think that you ask a good question, and I think you make some good points. Just from an authority perspective, I mean, at the county, we've looked closely, especially around concrete batch plants. And, one of the issues with the Texas Constitution is that for a county, like, we have to have specific authority in the Texas Constitution for actions that we take. And we don't believe that we really have any authority to regulate emissions or point source emissions or anything like that from the industrial sector. The city has a little bit more power, but a lot of these industrial facilities are outside of the city's lines, which limits them as well. And so, while I think that your point is well made, we're better off thinking in terms of, are there programs, market making programs, right? Like, what are the real solutions we want to see from the industrial sector? Why are they not happening? What are things that we can do that would incentivize them, not by giving things away? And I think, look, one is, green energy is a key to any of these sort of any solutions, right? Like, so how can we increase the supply and cost and availability of physical green energy in the county that could be made available to folks in the industrial sector that could help them, or at least give them an economic reason to take other actions. But to me, sort of market making kind of projects, ways to help stand up industries that don't exist here today, that would help lower emissions. That's a more effective way. Appreciate the desire for policy, but from our perspective, we've checked, we don't really have the kind of authority that we need.
Thanks, Jesse, for that answer, and I appreciate that. And I guess that just brings me to a point where I feel like we have to ask ourselves, yes, that's outside the scope of our authority, but do we honestly believe, if we're looking at the situation comprehensively, that voluntary measures and marketplace making solutions will actually get us to the place where we're at, or where we need to be to address the crisis? And so I just think this is really the time to ask ourselves and think critically. This is the limit of our authority, but is that actually going to achieve the goal that we need to achieve?
All righty then, Priya.
Thanks, Gregory. My question is more of a process procedural one for HGAC. So once you receive the applications through the call for projects, what happens next? Is there an evaluation process? I think, Andrew, you mentioned, or maybe Craig mentioned, putting together a universe of projects. Are we trying to prioritize? What does that process look like once you receive the applications?
So we have the call for projects, and it'll be open until the 23rd. We're starting to receive a number of projects through this process right now. And those projects are the applications that are being completed. There were 7 specific questions that were asked of each applicant. And those questions align very closely to the evaluation criteria that EPA is planning to use for their phase 2. But there are a couple options for the projects that come in through our call for projects. Like Craig mentioned earlier, we're considering projects for the PCAP. We are also considering projects that may have a longer horizon that may move into the CCAP plan. And then we can also identify projects that would be ideal for an implementation application. So there are 3 possible opportunities, and maybe there's even a 4th, because some of the applications that come in, even if it's not an ideal fit for one of those opportunities, it still gives us information for other funding opportunities that arise. And we're seeing a lot more activity on funding streams from the federal level. So this lets us know what some of the needs are in the region that we can pair with either this funding opportunity, this planning opportunity, or other funding opportunities that exist.
Sorry, thank you, Far, for that. One quick follow-up on that is, so 23rd of January is by when you expect all of these to be in. Is there a process of dialogue and discussion after, for instance, something that we've been thinking of, and I think Jesse mentioned it a while back, there are some of the larger, say, transit investment projects, which go a long way towards reducing VMTs. But there have been some traditional or historic funding opportunities for metro, say, such as the the New Starts or the Small Starts program, for which the region has been pretty successful. Should we think about if there is already a funding pipeline where these projects have been successful? Are we better served as a coalition or a region under the PCAP, CCAP right now to look for projects that haven't been, haven't found those funding pathways previously? I mean, things like that. Are we going to be able to discuss it as a group? Are you going to bring everyone back after the 23rd? I know it's a very aggressive timeline till March 1st. Do we have more meetings such as this where we can discuss some of these thoughts?
Yeah, so those are all good questions. And what we're planning to do once the call for projects close is we'll be reaching out to our partners on this project to help us actually evaluate what we've received through that process and help us with that prioritizing where those projects might fit best. But I would also like to mention that the call for projects isn't the only way that we're gathering project ideas. Like I mentioned earlier, we're soliciting the community through our Engage site. We're soliciting possible implementing agencies through the call for projects. We're also starting to do that crosswalk where we look at existing planning efforts and see what ideas exist there that can be mined and lifted into one of these opportunities. And then we're looking at best practices as well. So we're also, like I mentioned on one of the earlier slides, there's the state, and then there are 7 other MSAs that are going through this process. So we're in a constant dialogue trying to make sure that, we're considering all our options. And we're trying to align not just within our region, but, across the state. So the call for projects is one way to get this information, but we're trying to provide multiple opportunities. And there will definitely be multiple opportunities for review and comment on outcomes of this process. So on our website, like I mentioned before, once there is a draft or draft strategies, that Engage website is so intuitive. I think that's going to be the perfect place for us to post that and get input in an organized manner, not only from the community, but from possible implementers and other agencies, because we'd like to know we have your support moving forward into the through the plan, because I think implementation is going to be also a collaborative effort.
Thank you, Far. Really appreciate what you and Andrew and Craig are doing, and for your leadership and bring us all together. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Alexander Spike. I am with Airlines Houston. I want to first thank everyone for making this happen, hosting this, receiving questions and comments. I want to comment on the need for regional leadership on all these issues, from climate to more, co-benefits and all that. Y'all have, as HGAC, have an immense role to play in decarbonization. We've seen action on county and city, but there's 12 others in y'all's jurisdiction. In getting them involved in the fight for a just and equitable and clean and healthy, happy future is very much important. I want to encourage y'all to pursue, I think I saw it only mentioned once or twice over the course of 2 or 3 speakers, but emphasis on building codes, electrification, and things like parking reform. There's a little bit of chatter about the need to reduce vehicle miles traveled. That can be achieved in many different ways, including things like parking reform or all sorts of building and city building codes. And while these are being pursued in a handful of municipalities in the region, y'all, as a regional authority, could play a huge role in expanding and bringing those ideas to more places. Lastly, I wanted to ask a question about the role of carbon capture and carbon removal in industrial emission reduction. What might that look like, and what kind of, are there any sort of preliminary strategies or programs being pursued by HGAC concerning those two technologies?
First I want to say regarding your first comment about code reform and whatnot, I think that's something we're definitely interested in. And I think that's one of the things that we hope to be able to do over the next year or two, is to develop a working group to help with that. And this effort, this CPRG effort, we are working with cities and municipalities and counties from around the region, the 13 county HGAC region. And we made sure that everyone was invited to this meeting, and we're trying to engage and try to gather gather projects and gather comments and commentary from all of those. So I think it's something that we're working towards, and I think we're hoping that as time goes by, we'll have more and more participation, because we are doing outreach to the entire region. As far as carbon capture and storage is concerned, I don't think that that's really come up yet in our conversations. I know that there is definitely a lot of interest in that within the region. And certainly, if you look at some of our industries, there is a lot of interest in that. But as far as implementing a project, we haven't really had that conversation as of yet. But I think it's a worthwhile thing to think about.
I think that was the last question.
Yeah, and I think I believe that's the last question. Are there any other questions before we move on to our closing comments?
Andrew, this is Priya again. I'm sorry, the last question that came from the audience was not clear on the audio. Could you, I heard the answer, but the question was not super clear. I heard parking reform. Could someone just summarize the question?
Sure. I think there were two parts to it. First, sort of a discussion about interest in some measures that could potentially help, like parking reform, like code reform, and the like. I think that was sort of the first part of that. And then the second part was a question about whether we've been talking about carbon capture and storage as potential measures.
Got it. Thank you. I appreciate that.
So if we can go to our next slide, I just want to kind of revisit our timeline and next steps. So this last slide kind of lays out some of our major milestones and shows how we're progressing towards the deliverables. Upcoming milestones are our next three major milestones. The call for projects, which is closing again in a very short time frame. We've extended that from the 15th to the 22nd. The PCAP, which is due on March 1st. An implementation application that's due on April 2nd. This is a very compressed process and a very fast-moving process. So we're trying to be really flexible and allow as much time as we can for input. So although the call for projects may close, we know that we'll still have the Engage website open, because even after we pass the PCAP milestone, we'll just roll right into thinking through what goes into our CCAP, which is our more robust planning effort. So as we get more participation in that, I think all of these ideas are definitely being reviewed and considered. don't know if there are any questions on our timeline that I can answer.
Well, is there, I think I might be missing it, but when is the call for projects closing?
So the call for projects was initially scheduled to close, actually, I believe tomorrow, but we've extended it until the end of next week. So January 19th is our last day that we're accepting comments and projects.
Hi, thanks. Laura Goldberg, Center for Houston's Future. Who can apply for a call for project? Does it have to be a government entity or one of your partners, or can anybody submit that? I'm trying to understand what the rules are. I just took a look at the website and it wasn't entirely clear.
Okay, so it can be a municipal entity, it can be an academic institution. Applications can come in from non-governmental agencies as long as they're partnering with an agency in their area. So if you have an NGO that has a great project, and then they can work with the municipality in their area to submit that application. And right now through the call for projects, and we're really encouraging those types of partnerships too, because we do understand that not all the projects are gonna come from agencies. So please feel free to submit them and we'll definitely be evaluating them. Next slide, please.
One more question.
Or one more question.
Sorry, Farr, I just want to make sure I'm clear. The call for projects, earlier I heard you say January 22nd, but I think Andrew just said January 19th. So I want to make sure we have that date correct. Thanks.
And I know, I think what the challenge is here is we have a holiday coming up. And I want to allow as much time as possible. We were actually going to close it on the 19th. And then Monday was the holiday, and we did have someone submit a comment saying, hey, are you guys even going to be at work? Maybe we could use the weekend to bring in more ideas. And I realized that that's a great idea. So we're thinking that Monday when we'll be able to download and close the system and come in on Tuesday after the holiday and start that review.
Yeah. So apologies for the confusion. So it is January 22nd is when we close.
The website said 23rd.
Yes, Monday, January 22nd. Close of business, correct?
Close of business on Monday.
Yeah,
Yes.
close of business on the 22nd.
The holiday's the 14th, correct? Or the 15th?
Yeah, the holiday is the 15th. So, but we do want to give extra time, because of the holiday.
And this is our last slide. Andrew, if you want to close the meeting?
Sure. Yeah. So we're just, so we appreciate everyone joining us today and offering their comments and questions. As we showed before, here's all of our contact information for Director Rayborn, myself, and Farr. If you have any questions, please feel free to reach out to us directly. We're happy to talk about this project. We love this project and we're very excited about this project. So please feel free to reach out to us, and we look forward to continuing to work with folks from around the region on this project. So thank you all for joining us today, and for all of you who are here in person, have a safe drive home.
Oh. I totally did get the dates wrong. The 19th is the day, because the